Hello, welcome to Nok by j.N.S. And today we are going to talk about part 3 of the Black Man series, which is titled, What Did the Black Woman Encode in the Black Man's DNA? And the answer to the first part of this question is civilization. So, with that in mind, we are going to go through all of Africa's civilizations from the last 20,000 years that is purposely hidden and not well known, because the black woman created the black man, which was covered in part 1 of the Black Man series, and then part 2 was why did she create him, and now part 3 is, well, what did she encode in him? And this the answer to part 3 is going to be multifaceted. So the first one is going to be civilization, and that's what we're going to cover today. And she encoded him with the ability to know how to build civilization. And this is what he used to do with no problem before he went astray and overthrew the Queen Mothership. And we are doing this series as a reminder of our history and as a way to get the few black men who will most likely be under the age of 25 and are ready to receive enlightenment, and they want to get back to their true nature. So we know that many will ignore the divine judgment and continue their path of self-destruction, and we must let that happen. But for those of us who are ready to receive these teachings and embrace the dark wisdom and do everything that is required of us to ascend as human beings, we're going to receive a boon. So remember, if you have not checked out part 1, Who Created the Black Man and the Law of Gender, you need to go watch that first, and then you need to go follow up with part 2, which was Why Was He Created? And then you're able to understand the context of what we're doing here. Also, to accurately follow these teachings, you should have watched all 6 videos to the Queen Mothership series, starting with part 1. And you will need to go and read the Nok Queen Mothership book, which is subtitled Reinstatement of Ancient African Philosophy for Healing and Restoration. You can get that on ebook, or you can get the actual paperback. So you need to have all of this information in your mind already before we can bring you through the trenches to get you back to your true nature, because you have to understand what happened, why we ended up in this situation, what were black men doing, thousands of years ago, and why did all of this happen to us as a people. You have to go understand that. You need to understand what needs to be done in 2020 and what the black woman's role and what she's going to be planning on doing. Many are going to divest. Many are going to step up in their goddesshood, in their God consciousness, in order to elevate herself and that of her progeny, which will be her seed, with the goal of transforming and sublimating the community's consciousness within 1 to 2 generations, only through her kid. So it's like a each one teach one situation. She's not concerned with saving anyone else. She's not concerned with doing for anybody else, just herself. And through her enlightenment, she enlightens her immediate surroundings. That is what this age of Aquarius is teaching the black woman, to put herself first and to evolve her consciousness by any means necessary. And those who are willing to support her in that quest, they will get their boons, and she will in turn be able to truly give them the wisdom that they need. So again, you want to make sure that you follow the teachings, and you have watched all 6 videos of the Queen Mothership series, that you have read the Nok Queen Mothership book. And if you haven't, then you would not be prepared for where we're going, and you don't have the context to the Nok Queen Mothership. So this is only for the chosen black men and black women who decide to embrace the dark feminine wisdom in the age of Aquarius. from the Queen Mother herself, Kali j.N.S. So let's start, and let's, in your mind's eye, let's just act like these civilizations are still in existence. Like, really get into these pictures I'm gonna be showing you. Listen with your mind open while as I'm telling you the history of many of these civilizations that you may know some of, but some may be new. So just have an open mind and know that this is with the best intentions to get you to know your history and to know thyself, to have knowledge of self. Because once you know what you have done in the past, you know that you can do it again. So we're not going to go any further into a lot of this trauma bonding that the African American and the black diaspora we like to do. We know that our ancestors went through some crazy ass shit that they had no business even going through, and that they are in pain, and that we need to elevate them on the physical realm and get them ascended in their consciousness. Some of our ancestors, they need that healing. So part of the healing that they will receive is if the black American, black diaspora individual who has a physical shell right now in the third dimensional realm on planet Earth, remembering that information will that's encoded in our cell memory consciousness is what the black man needs to know, so that he can understand where he needs to go and what he is actually capable of. Okay, so I'm making this video for my future kids and for young little boys 2, 5, 6 years old that have a parent that may be too busy to teach them history and knowledge of self. So this video is for these young kids out here who just think that whose mind really thinks that their whole history is summed up in 1619. Like, black people really be thinking that their history either started in 1492 or 1619. I be getting into arguments with people who try to start our history literally from 1492 when they don't even realize we had civilizations in 200 BC. So it's very important to know all these things. So again, open your mind, enjoy the video, and just be ready to receive some history. Okay? So let's start with the first civilization that it's probably not the oldest, but it's the one that gets us the closest to the oldest. And that is called Nok culture. The Nok Civilization. N-O-K. Which flourished in southern West Africa, which just happens today to be modern Nigeria. Okay, so they were around during the Iron Age from the 5th century BC. 5th century BC, like how long ago that is, to 2nd century CE, which is Common Era. So remember, the BC is supposedly before Christ, but that is before Common Era, and they lasted to the 2nd century. So the Nok culture civilization, they were known for the distinctive terracotta sculptures of human heads and figures. They had some of the most highly advanced smelted iron heads known in existence, and they produced such art. This was the first civilization to perfect iron smelting technology. And just so you know, some of the heads that they have made are around 20,000 years old. So they were located on the east of the Niger River and north of the Benue River. And the sculptures that they left, like a lot of the artifacts that were found, were mostly fragmentary sculptures, and they were buried under about 26 feet of sand and earth. And this is how we were able to learn about this civilization. And basically, they were doing some local mining operations, and around 1928, and that's when they found out that this civilization existed. So the Nok culture prospered thanks to their iron smelting technology, which permitted the manufacture of iron tools, smelting, and forging tools. So by at least 550 BC, and possibly a few centuries earlier, most likely a few centuries earlier, they had this iron smelting going on. And it was independently discovered in the region by 1000 BC. And what's so important to know about this Nok civilization is they jumped straight from the Stone Age directly to the Iron Age. There was no Bronze Age that is typical in all other places in the world. And the Nok farmers, this civilization, they love to grow cereals like sorghum and pumpkin. That was what they like to. They admired the pumpkin, and they used to draw it a lot in their terracotta artifacts. So we found this information out by excavations at Taruga, which revealed the oldest Nok civilization settlement, and it was inhabited between the 4th and 2nd century BC, according to radiocarbon data off charcoal found within the iron furnaces. So at almost all Nok sites, there are charred plants, plant remains consisting of firewood and plant material for cooking. And there's also remnants of pure millet, which was one of Africa's oldest grain crops that are commonly found. So pearl millet is highly productive and resistant to adverse growing conditions, including drought. So this is why the Nok civilization, which was one of the first African civilizations in modern day Nigeria now, they love the pearl millet and cowpeas. Those are the only crops known to have been cultivated by the Nok. And they probably did other things, but obviously it decomposed by the earth, so we don't have any information on it. And a lot of researchers say that they found these grounding stones that were used for the grains, and they made lots of porridge. So this is what a lot of our ancestors were eating back then: cereal, porridge, and pumpkins. And as well as, I think they said they found some blueberry, like some type of fruit remnants as well. So that is the Nok civilization, and they vanished under unknown circumstances around 500 AD. So they lasted about 2,000 years, okay? And they are also known for, they used to make some stone rings, which are, very rare. And they used to make the stone rings out of quartz, jasper, and carnelian. And today, as of 2020, we found 1,000 Nok sculptures. And they were stolen, and they were illegally excavated and smuggled into Europe, the USA, and Japan, and elsewhere. And even as late as 2013, it was reported that 5 Nok statues had been stolen by some French guy, and they were looted, and they caught him. So people, because they're still, like, here's the thing: you can still mine in some of these areas, and find, if you go, you might find these sculptures still in the ground. So some of these tourists, they go over there and they be looking, they be digging up in the ground, because even they know about our history more than we do a lot of the time. So the Nigerians themselves, they walking around not realizing that their ancestors have literally had civilizations for at least 2,000 years, and some of their at least goes back 20,000 years. And if they just dig 26 feet in the ground, they gonna find some old ass iron head artwork, some art sculpture. They just be walking around thinking about getting the next bowl of jollof rice and working and doing whatever else they do over there. And then other people, they'll get on the damn plane, some tourists from France or Italy or somewhere will come over and be illegally digging in the ground to look for some damn Nok sculpture. Okay? So this is a civilization that we must respect. And this is a civilization that is pretty damn cool, because again, they were the first on the planet to do iron smelting. They went straight from the stone straight to iron, so that's very powerful. And as we know, iron changed the world. So we owe it to the Nok civilization, our ancestors, who are most likely of West African descent. And these people, we thank you for your civilization and for passing that information down to us. So now we're going to move to the next civilization, which is, of course, Egypt. So ancient Egypt lasted for over 15,000 years. I know they tell y'all 3,000 to 5,000. I've got wind from the spiritual side. Y'all don't have to listen to me. I don't care. That it's more like 15,000. This is what the ancestors told me. More like 15,000. That 3,000, 5,000 shit, that's just some stuff to continue the brainwashing. Okay? So here we have the civilization of Egypt, and a lot of you may say, well, that's North Africa, da 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 da. You clearly don't know the haplogroups of the pharaohs, which is the DNA that was found in the pharaohs of King Tut, Ramesses II, Ramesses III, Queen Thuya, and Hatshepsut. So if you were to know their haplogroup DNA, you will find out that their haplogroup markers are found in West Africa to this day. So for instance, Ramesses III has a haplogroup of EV38, which is only found in West Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa. So EV38 is the ancestor to EM2, and 99% of the EM2 haplogroup is found in West Africa. And it is today the Yoruba tribe, the Gele tribe, the Ile tribe. It's some other tribes that I'm forgetting, the Fulani. They each have a variation of, they have EM2, but they may have a like say for instance, the Yoruba have 93% or 96% of EM2 gene, which is a direct descendant of Ramesses III. So a lot of people don't want to understand that, as far as when it relates to Egypt, that many of those pharaohs were had that a sub-Saharan haplogroup. Now, obviously, Egypt lasted 15,000 years. People move all around Africa, and then Egypt itself was a trading hub, especially with the Nile River. So of course you're going to have people from the Horn of Africa come through, East Africa come through, West Africa come through, and you're going to have the mixing. Now Egypt didn't really start falling apart until Rome and Greece and the Hyksos and all these other weird groups started trying to invade them and take over, and of course the Arabics. But for a long time, Egypt was its own civilization within Africa, trading with other tribes in Africa, and that's just what it was. So the reason why I'm included Egypt in our civilizations, because it is absolutely related to us and our ancestors. Many of us contain the haplogroups. At least 60% of African Americans have the same haplogroup of Ramesses III, straight up. So you as an African American, you have 60% chance. Then 1 in 3 is related to Queen Thuya. 1 in 3 African American has the Thuya gene. So what does that mean? That means that these are very well our ancestors. And whatever they know, you know, it's just buried in your subconscious cell memory. So let's keep learning about Egypt. So historians usually group the history of ancient Egypt into 3 major kingdoms, called the Old Kingdom, the Middle Kingdom, and the New Kingdom. And it was during this times that ancient Egypt was at its strongest and solidified. So anything that was between those kingdoms are looked at as intermediate periods of war, or trying to figure out who's about to get the throne and shit like that. So Egypt's best known monarch is known as Hatshepsut. And Hatshepsut is not only the most successful female ruler in Egypt's history, but she is actually one of the most remarkable leaders of the ancient world period. So during this time, we had the Queen Mothership going on. So there was actually no evidence of rebellion on the part of her subjects of the court. And they believed that her reign enriched Egypt financially and culturally, without even having to engage in any extensive military campaign. So again, a lot of the queen mothers in Egypt, they represented the elders. So they were like the priestess in this era. But when it came time they gave advice to the pharaoh. But in the event that they needed to be the pharaoh themselves, there was never any pushback, because it was always a diarchy anyways. So let's keep going. So although there is evidence that she commissioned military expeditions early in her reign, the remainder was peaceful and focused on Egypt's infrastructure, building projects, and trade. She re-established contact with the land of Punt, which supplied Egypt with many of the luxury goods that the upper class came to covet, as well as necessary items for the worship of the gods, such as incense and cosmetic industries and oils and scented flowers. So other pharaohs include Thutmose III, Amenhotep III, Akhenaten, King Tut, Ramesses II, and Ramesses III. They all reigned during the time during this time, and some of the most famous monuments and temples, such as Colosseum of Memnon and Temple of Amun at Karnak, were built. So the empire flourished through the reign of Ramesses III, when invasions occurred primarily by the Sea People. So let's talk about the Middle Kingdom. So the Middle Kingdom, which is 2040 through 1870, which is 2040 through 1782 BC. So during the 12th dynasty, this was considered Egypt's golden age, when cultural and artistic achievements reached their height. And during the 13th dynasty, however, the kings were weaker and more concerned with their own pursuits and court intrigues than the good of the country. So during this time, the Hyksos, which was they were a Caucasoid people, they were able to establish themselves at the Avaris in Lower Egypt, and steadily consolidated their presence until they were able to wield significant political and military power. So the scribes of the New Kingdom characterized the Hyksos as invaders. They were seen as a nuisance. This group that traveled, on this little part of the peninsula. They lived like on a small part of Egypt and called themselves trying to set up shop and copy off of them. These people came from these were of a Caucasoid people. So the government at Thebes, which is Egypt, grew tired of feeling like guests in their own country. So the Theban king, known as Seqenenre, probably pronouncing that wrong, but he existed around 1580 BC, interpreted a message that he received from the Hyksos king. He basically was trying to tell the Egyptians that they gotta stop hippo hunting. So the king of Thebes felt like that was a challenge to his authority and said, we gotta get these motherfuckers up out of here, and launched a campaign against the town of Avaris. And Tao, which was the king of Thebes, he was killed in a battle, but his cause was taken up by his son Chamos, and then by Almost the First, who defeated the Hyksos and unified Egypt. So Ahmose the First conquered Avaris and drove the Hyksos survivors into the Levant, and then he pursued them up through Syria. In doing so, he conquered those regions for Egypt and installed his own officials to govern them. And Ahmose the First established a policy of creating buffer states around Egypt's border so that an invasion such as that of the Hyksos would never be possible again. And as we know, ancient Egypt was rich in culture, including government, religion, arts, and writings. The government and religion were tied together as the leader of the government. And the pharaoh was also the leader of the religion. And only scribes could read and write, and they were considered to be powerful people. So now let's talk about some of the pyramids and treasures. The pharaohs of Egypt were often buried in giant pyramids or secret tombs. They believed that they needed treasure to be buried with them to help them in the afterlife. And as a result, archaeologists have a lot of well-preserved artifacts that we are aware of to this day. The 19th dynasty in Egypt continued to be success, as well as the 18th, but during the 20th dynasty, the empire of Egypt began to decline. So Ramesses II and his successor Merenptah had both defeated invasions by the Sea Peoples. And the Sea Peoples were a coalition of different tribes who were responsible for weakening and destroying a number of civilizations at this time. So Ramesses II and his successor Merenptah had both defeated the invasions by the Sea Peoples. And also under the reign of Ramesses III, the Sea Peoples returned in force, and he had no choice but to mobilize the army and mount a defense. But Ramesses III finally defeated the Sea People just as his father had, but it had cost in lives and resources. And this is where evidence of problems arising afterwards occurred. There was a significant loss of labor, which resulted in less grain production and a struggling economy. So the cost of the war had also depleted the treasury, and trade relations with other powers were suffering because Egypt did not have the kind of resources as before. These other powers were dealing with their own difficulties resulting from raids by the sea people and others. So Ramesses III was the last great pharaoh of the new kingdom. He was also referred to as the war pharaoh. He was killed by his wife for the throne, unfortunately. So the problems with which led to the rapid decline of the empire manifested themselves only toward the end of his reign, though, because he reigned for about 30 years. And after his reign, the country entered what is known as the Ramessid period, which is when Ramesses IV and then Ramesses V and so on proceeded over the steady decline of Egypt. So the ancient Egyptian empire began to weaken in about 700 BC, and it was conquered by a number of other civilizations. The first to conquer Egypt was the Assyrian Empire, followed 100 or so years later by the Persian Empire. In 332 BC, Alexander the Great of Greece conquered Egypt and set up his own ruling family called the Ptolemaic dynasty. Finally, the Romans came in 30 BC, and Egypt became a province of Rome. So that is another important civilization that you need to be aware of. Most of us do know somewhat about Egypt because we were taught about that in school, but that's just a more backdrop information. So let's move on to the Kush civilization, which is very similar to Egypt, but just somewhat different. So let's get into some of the differences in this civilization. So the kingdom of Kush was located in northeast Africa, just south of ancient Egypt. And the main cities of Kush were situated along the Nile River. And today, that land is known as the country of Sudan. So the kingdom of Kush lasted over 1400 years, and it was first established around 1070 BC when it gained its independence from Egypt. They also were known to actually conquer Egypt again and stuff. So it was some weird stuff going on back then. It quickly became a major power in northeast Africa. In 727 BC, Kush conquered Egypt and ruled until the Assyrians arrived. And the empire began to weaken after Rome conquered Egypt and eventually collapsed sometime in 300 CE. So the kingdom of Kush was very similar to ancient Egypt in many aspects, including government, culture, and religion. The Kushites, they built pyramids at burial sites, they worshiped the same gods, and they mummified their dead. And the ruling class of Kush were considered Egyptians back then. Like it's very confusing because it seems like these were two separate civilizations, but they were very similar in some aspects. They did go to war. Egypt conquered Kush, then Kush came back and conquered them, so there was some differences though. So the Kushite kings became the pharaoh of Egypt's 25th dynasty, and the Kushite queen mothers dominated the political landscape of Thebes in a position of God's wife of Amun. The Kushite king Kashta, which existed in 750 BC, was the first to establish himself on an Egyptian throne and appointed his daughter Amenerdes the first Kushite god's wife of Amun. The Egyptians also regarded Kush as the land of Tanisi, which is the land of the black people. So two of the most important resources of ancient Kush were gold and iron. And gold helped Kush to become wealthy, and it could be traded to the Egyptians and other nearby nations. Iron was the most important metal of the age. It was used to make lots of weapons. So in 590 BC, the capital of Kush, Napata, was sacked by the Egyptian pharaoh Psammetichus II. And the capital of Kush was moved to Meroe, which is Meroe. And the kingdom of Kush continued on with Meroe as its capital until an invasion by the Aksumites in 330 CE, which destroyed the city and toppled the kingdom. Also, the Kush, they overused their land and they had already depleted their resources. So those cities were on its way to being abandoned, even without the Aksumite invasion. But after the Aksumite did invade Kush, they survived about another 20 years before its end in 350 CE. So that's the Kush Empire. very similar to the Egyptian Empire. Some see it as one and the same. I'm not here to argue that. I do think there were two cultures that existed, and I think that they each vied for power, but they were very much similar. So now let's talk about the Aksum Civilization, which began in 400 BC. So the kingdom of Aksum was located along the southern coast of the Red Sea in the Horn of Africa. The kingdom covered much of the current-day country of Eritrea, as well as northern Ethiopia, Sudan, Yemen, and southern Saudi Arabia. So legend has it that the kingdom was first established by the son of King Solomon of Israel and the queen of Sheba. So Aksum began to rise in power and expand around 100 CE, reaching its peak around 350 CE. It continued to rule the region until around 940 CE, when it was conquered by a foreigner. After a period of unrest, the Zagwe dynasty took control of the region. So the Aksum civilization prospered thanks to their agriculture skills and cattle herding. They also took control over trade routes, which saw gold and ivory exchanged for foreign luxury goods. The kingdom and its capital of Aksum built long-lasting stone mountains and achieved a number of firsts. It was the first sub-Saharan African state to mint its own coinage, and around 350 CE, it was the first to officially adopt Christianity, because many of these people were actually Hebrew. So Aksum even created its own script, which is called j.N.S, G-E with an apostrophe E-Z, which is still used in Ethiopia today. So the Aksum reached its peak under the leadership of King Ezana, who ruled from around 325 CE to 360 CE. And during this time, the Aksum expanded its territory and became a major trade center. This trade network included links with Egypt to the north and to the east along the East African coast and southern Arabia. They exchanged wheat, barley, millet, and teff, which is a high-yield grain. Unlike the northern neighbors of Egypt, the Aksum did not build pyramids, but they were famous for building these tall towers called stelae. The tallest of these towers were nearly 100 feet high, and the towers were elaborately carved with inscriptions, stone doors, and fake windows. And the most famous of these towers is the obelisk of Aksum, which was taken by Italian soldiers upon conquering Ethiopia in 1937. The tower was later returned in pieces because they dashed it out of envy, and then it was reconstructed in 2008. So unfortunately, Aksum was destroyed by Islamic invaders in 710, and particularly the city of Adulis. And this isolated Aksum, and it began in its decline. They didn't have any real state administrative apparatus, so it was easy to take control. So that is the Aksum civilization. You see how these civilizations, they pop up and they decline. Like all civilizations worldwide, it happens to every civilization, and we can even see some of that happening now, but that's stories for another days. But let's go on to the next civilization. So as you can see, we already done went through 3 of them. So now let's go on to some that may not be as familiar to you. The South Civilization. And this started in the 6th century BC, and it lasted to the 16th century AD. So the South Civilization flourished in Middle Africa from around the 6th century, and they lived by the Chari River south of Lake Chad. Then later became part of Cameroon and Chad. The South artifacts show that they were skilled workers in bronze, copper, and iron. So this is around that Chad area, and there's not a lot of information about this civilization. We just know that they lasted pretty long. So that's the South Civilization. Now let's talk about the Ghana Civilization. So ancient Ghana ruled from around 300 to 1100 CE. And the empire first formed when a number of tribes of the Soniki peoples were united under the first king, Dinga Sisi. The government of the empire was feudal, who had local kings who paid tribute to the high king, but ruled their land as they saw fit. So the main source of wealth for the Empire of Ghana was the mining of iron and gold. Iron was used to produce strong weapons and tools, and that made the empire strong. Gold was used to trade with other nations for needed resources like livestock, tools, and cloth, ostrich feathers, and slaves to the Muslim merchants. They established trade relations with the Muslims of Northern Africa and the Middle East, Niger, and Senegal. And long caravans of camels were used to transport goods across the Sahara Desert. And the reputation of the Ghana Empire spread to North Africa and Europe, where it was described as the fabulous land of gold. So around 1050 CE, the Empire of Ghana began to come under pressure from the Muslims, and somewhat forced to convert to Islam. And the kings of Ghana's refused and soon came under constant attacks from Northern Africa. At the same time, a group of people called the Susu broke free of Ghana, and the Ghana Empire crumbled from the 12th century CE following a drought, civil wars, and the opening of trade routes elsewhere. So over the next few hundred years, Ghana weakened until it eventually became a part of the Mali Empire. So I'm going to give you some fun facts about the Ghana Empire before we move on to the Mali Empire. So in the Ghana civilization, ironsmiths were revered in this society. They were considered powerful magicians because they worked with fire and earth to create iron. Also, crossing the Sahara Desert from a coastal city to Ghana typically took around 40 days when traveling on a caravan of camels. And most of the people living in the empire were farmers. They didn't own the land, and each family was allotted a portion of the land by the local village leader. And another cool thing was that salt was considered very valuable, and the salt trade was heavily taxed by the king. Salt was sometimes used as money and was almost as valuable as gold in the Ghana Empire. So now that we understand the Ghana civilization, let's thank our ancestors for what they done during that empire, and let's remember them. So now let's talk about the kingdom of Mapungubwe, which was in 1075 CE and lasted to 1220 CE. So the kingdom of Mapungubwe was a pre-colonial state in southern Africa, located at the confluence of the Shashe and Limpopo rivers south of Great Zimbabwe. The kingdom built stone walls to mark important areas. This civilization was the precursor to the kingdom of Zimbabwe in the 13th century. And they traded gold and had links to the Rapta and Kisiwani on the African East Coast. The kingdom of Mapungubwe lasted about 70 years, and at its height, its population was just about 5,000 people. So it was a very small one, but one that we should remember. This one was mostly around the East Africa, Southern Africa area. So now let's go and talk about the Mali Empire. The Mali civilization started in 1240 CE and lasted to 1645 CE. So the Mali Empire of West Africa was founded by Sundiata Keita. Sundiata's centralized government, diplomacy, and well-trained army permitted a massive military expansion, which paved the way for a flourishing of the Mali Empire, making it the largest yet seen in Africa. Now we're going to talk about Mansa Musa. The reign of Mansa Musa started in 1312 CE and lasted to 1337 CE, and it saw the empire reach new heights in terms of territory. It had a lot of cultural influence in Africa, and the staggering wealth brought through Mali's control, and they had amassed great wealth because of their control of regional trade routes. They acted as a middle trader between North Africa via the Sahara Desert and the Niger River to the south. Mali exploited the traffic in gold, salt, copper, ivory, and slaves that crisscrossed West Africa. So Muslim merchants were attracted to all this commercial activity, and they consorted with Mali rulers who would in turn spread Islam via such noted centers of learning such as Timbuktu. In contrast to cities like Niani, which was the capital, Guinea and Gao, most of rural Mali populations remained farmers who clung to their traditional animist beliefs. So there was a group of Mandi people in Mali, and they spoke similar languages and had similar cultures. People were divided into castes, and one of the most respected castes in Mali were the farmers. Farmers were highly regarded because they provided the food. And just below the farmers were the artisans, and other groups included fishermen, scribes, civil servants, soldiers, shaman and priests, and slaves. So let's talk about Mansa Musa's trip. It is said that Mansa Musa was extremely rich, that he brought as many as 60,000 people along with him on his pilgrimage. He also bought camels loaded with gold. During his travel, Mansa Musa gave and spent a significant amount of gold that actually threw the economy of Egypt off because he gave them so much. But he also brought back a lot of new ideas to Mali as well. This included a number of scholars. He brought back architects. He was able to get the best architects, the best poets, and teachers to help improve the Mali Empire. So some historians estimate that Mansa Musa is literally the wealthiest person in history to this day. So unfortunately, the Mali Empire collapsed in the 1460 Common Era following civil wars and the opening up of trade routes elsewhere, as well as the rise of the neighboring Songhai Empire. So let's talk about the Songhai Empire, which started in 1464 CE. The Songhai Empire first came into power under the leadership of Sunni Ali. Sunni Ali was the prince of the Songhai. He was being held as a political prisoner by the leader of the Mali Empire at the time. But in 1464, Sunni Ali escaped to the city of Gao and took control of the city. And from the city of Gao, he established the Songhai Empire and began to conquer nearby regions, including the important trading cities of Timbuktu and Djinni. In 1493, Askia Muhammad became the leader of the Songhai. He brought the Songhai Empire to its height of power and founded the Askia dynasty. Askia Muhammad was a devout Muslim, and under his rule, Islam became a huge part of the empire. He conquered much of the surrounding lands and took control of the gold and salt trade from the Mali Empire. So, the Songhai Empire was divided into 5 provinces, each led by a governor. Under Askia Muhammad, all the governors, judges, and towns and chiefs were Muslims. The emperor had total power, but he also had ministers and queen mothers who ran different aspects of the empires for him. They also counseled the emperor on important issues. The slave trade became an important part of the Songhai Empire, and slaves were used to help transport goods across the Sahara Desert to Morocco and the Middle East. Slaves were also sold to the Europeans to work in Europe and in the Americas. So we were selling our own. Like, a lot of y'all love to argue me down and make it seem like it was just, we were just taken off of some boats when we started this shit. Okay? So unfortunately, that was taking place at the time. And in the mid-1500s, the Songhai Empire began to weaken due to internal strife and civil war. In 1591, the Moroccan army invaded and captured the cities of Timbuktu and Gao. The empire collapsed and was divided up into a number of separate smaller states. Lastly, the Portuguese started to control the gold trade that was originally near Ghana. But they were not as successful as they hoped in exporting Africa's resources, because the Songhai still managed to monopolize the Saharan caravan trade, which brought back rock salt and luxury goods like fine cloth, glassware, sugar, and horses to the Sudan region in exchange for gold, ivory, spices, cola nuts, hides, and slaves. So Timbuktu had a population of around 100,000 in the mid-15th century CE, and they continued to thrive as a trade port and as an important learning center into the 16th century and 17th centuries, where they eventually declined. So that is the Songhai Civilization, and some of us may be familiar with that empire, some of us may not be, but it's very important that we know that they existed. So you can see this common thread of gold, iron, salt, luxury goods, slaves, so we see this common thing that we were doing. We were big on the trade. We were big on building, big on displays of wealth. But we did a lot of things that we shouldn't have been doing, and that was obviously selling our own people. So let's continue. And now let's talk about the Canaan Empire, which started in 700 CE and lasted to 1376 CE. So the Canaan Empire encompassed an area covering not only much of Chad, but also parts of southern Libya and eastern Niger and northeastern Nigeria and northern Cameroon. The empire reportedly was able to field 40,000 cavalry. By the late 11th century, the Islamic Safawa dynasty was founded by Humayy ibn Salamna, and I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing this stuff wrong. The Safawa dynasty ruled for 771 years, making it one of the longest lasting dynasties in human history. So that is the Canaan Empire. Let's talk about the Ajuran Empire that started in the 13th century and lasted through the late 17th century. The Ajuran Sultanate was a Somali Muslim empire that ruled over large parts of the Horn of Africa in the Middle Ages. The empire left an extensive architectural legacy, being one of the major medieval Somali powers engaged in castle and fortress building. So this empire was known for building castles. And many of the ruined fortifications dotting the landscapes of southern Somalia today are attributed to the Ajuran Sultanate's engineers. So as we can see, look at these beautiful castles that were being built. Pretty impressive. So now let's keep going. Let's talk about the Bornu Empire, which started in 1380 and lasted to 1893 CE. The Bornu Empire was a state of what is now northeastern Nigeria. These are much smaller empires, of course. It was a continuation of the Great Canaan Empire, founded centuries earlier by the Safawa dynasty. In time, it would become even larger than Canaan, incorporating areas that are today parts of Chad, Niger, and Cameroon. So that is the Bornu Empire, and we can see how that civilization looked at that time. So let's move on. And let's talk about the Shilluk Kingdom, which started in the 15th century. The Shilluk Kingdom was centered in South Sudan from the 15th century along a strip of land on the western bank of the White Nile. After 1650, the Shilluk population appeared to gain a sense of national unity, accompanied by a strengthening of a royal authority. The monarch, known as the Ref, and a more centralized government established a monopoly over the economic resources and trade. So let's talk about the Bagirmi Kingdom, which was started in the 16th and 17th century. So the Kingdom of Bagirmi existed as an independent state southeast of Lake Chad in what is now the country of Chad. The Bagirmi emerged from the southeast of the Canaan Bornu Empire. The kingdom's first ruler was Magam Berni Bessi. During periods of strength, the Sultanate began a conquest. It established control over small feudal kingdoms on its peripheries and entered into alliances with nearby nomadic people. So that is the Bagirmi civilization. So let's talk about the Luba Empire, which started in 1585 and lasted to 1889. The Kingdom of Luba was a Central African state founded by King Kogolo Maniema around 1585 in the marshy grasslands of the Umbimba Depression, what is now the Southern Democratic Republic of Congo. Maniema's nephew and immediate successor, Kalala Lunga, expanded the empire over the upper left bank territories of the Lualaba River, and at its peak, the state had about 1 million people paying tribute to its king. So let's talk about the Wade Empire, which started in 1635 and lasted to 1912. The Wade Empire or Sultanate was a kingdom located on the east of Lake Chad in present-day Chad and in the Central African Republic. The Sultanate expanded its power as it profited considerably from its strategic position astride the trans-Saharan trade routes. The militaristic Wade fought French domination until being overcome on June 6, 1909. and they still resisted until 1912. So let's talk about the Lunda Empire, which started in 1665 and lasted into 1887. The Kingdom of Lunda was a pre-colonial African confederation of states in what is now the Democratic Republic of Congo, northeastern Angola, and northwestern Zambia, with a base of about 175,000 inhabitants. The Lunda Kingdom controlled about 150,000 square kilometers by 1680, but the state doubled in size and height in the 19th century. The Lunda Empire was known for their pretty cool architecture as well. So let's take a look at some of these houses that the Lunda Empire were known for, and let's remember this civilization. Now let's talk about the last civilization, and I know there's more, but I'll be sitting here forever talking. So let's talk about the last one that's on the list, which is called the Sokoto Caliphate, which was started in 1804. So the Sokoto Caliphate was a sovereign Sunni Muslim caliphate in West Africa that was founded during the Jihad of the Fulani War in 1804 by Usman Dan Fodio. Developed in the context of multiple independent House of Kingdoms, at its height, the caliphate linked over 30 different emirates and over 10 million people in the most powerful state in the region, and one of the most significant empires in Africa in the 19th century. The caliphate was a loose confederation of emirates that recognized the suzerainty of the I'm pronouncing this stuff wrong, so forgive me, Amir Al-Mu'minin, the Sultan of Sokoto. The caliphate brought decades of economic growth throughout the region. An estimated 1 through 2.5 million non-Muslim slaves were captured during the Fulani War. See, they were selling their own people once again. Slaves provided labor for plantations and were provided an opportunity to become Muslims. And these were black people. These were not Arabs. Like, these were what are modern day Nigerians. They, like the Hausa tribe to this, so these were not like Arab invaders. They were converts to the Muslim religion. So much of the growth of the state occurred through the establishment of an extensive system of ribets as part of the consolidation policy of Muhammad Bello, the second sultan. Ribets were established, founding a number of new cities with walled fortresses, schools, markets, and other buildings. These proved crucial in expansion through the developing new cities, settling the pastoral Fulani people and supporting the growth of plantations, which were vital to the economy. It was dissolved when the British conquered the area in 1903 and annexed it in the newly established Northern Nigeria Protectorate. So that was one of their last major kingdoms, and it obviously had got conquered by the British. So the point of this video was to get you to see that you have always had a history of building civilizations, that there was never a time where you did not have your own civilizations, and especially before our history of descent, that which started obviously with our people being sold into slavery and even sold off into slavery by our own ancestors. So it is important for you to understand, as a black man listening to this, that your encoding and part of your DNA and nature is to know how to build civilizations. It is in your blood. It is something that you cannot run away from. And just because you have a 1,000 year history of kind of falling off, we being real about that, and that goes for the black woman too. Just because we have a history of not being at our best height for 1,000 years, don't mean that you just throw away all of your other history. Because for the last 20,000 years, I just showed y'all that y'all were doing civilizations before coming into contact with foreigners, overthrowing the Queen Mothership and selling your own people, and then being conquered by those same people who exploited our weaknesses and tribalism. So I say these things to you not so you can feel bad, but like, because guess what? Empires rise and fall. Like, that's just nature. That's just the story of the beast. Same thing happened with Rome. Same thing happened with Greece. Same thing happened with the Persian Empire, the Ottoman Empire. Come on. So that's not the big deal. The point is for you to not to walk away knowing that these empires fell. That's certainly not the point. The point is that you understand that you have a history for the last 20,000 years of building a civilization, running it for 1,000 years or 700 years or what, it gets morphed into another empire, or it gets conquered by another neighbor. I just showed you how the Ghana Empire became the Mali Empire, and how the Songhai took over Mali, and then how the Borno and Canaan took over, some other shit. So that's just the nature of it, okay, of civilization. But that is still in your DNA. So don't think just because our history may have shown a very dark spot in our history, and slavery certainly is, so we admit that, though, that for the last 500 to 1,000 years, we haven't been in our game. We haven't been A1. But that doesn't mean you can never go back to being on top of the game. And that certainly doesn't mean that your ass don't know how to build. Okay? Because I done showed you that about the Aksum Empire. That was a sub-Saharan empire. I showed you the Nok Civilization. That was sub-Saharan. I showed you Ghana and all. So y'all gotta stop acting like y'all don't know how to do civilization today, how to build one for yourself. You need to stop having such low self-esteem and thinking that your history just starts in damn 1619 or damn 1492. Because I just showed you some shit that was going on in 500 BC with the Nok Civilization, and told you the things they like to eat. And those are the Nigerian ancestors, and some Black American ancestors as well. The Nok Civilization. So you need to take away that part of the encoding that is in the black man's DNA and nature is to know how to build a civilization. Why? Because you have did it, and your DNA is 3.8 million years old, at least according to Western science, and according to Eastern science, and what a lot of the African believe, 160 million years. Some even say damn 4.2 billion years, as long as the earth was in existence. So however long your DNA is, we know that it's at least 3.8 million years old, since the time of Australopithecus. So now all of a sudden, you've been on this earth for that millions and millions of years of evolution, and now y'all acting like y'all don't know how to build? Y'all don't know how to build a civilization now? Because you've been beat so long, for 500 years, is beating, to believe that you don't know how to do nothing but be a slave. So now that you've become effectively brainwashed, you have forgotten all of your history and refuse to acknowledge your ancestors. So now you see why I pull no bars with you, and I take no prisoners when I'm giving you y'all information, and I talk my shit. Now y'all see why I be talking like this, because I done studied all this stuff for years, and I can't believe how I see my community acting. I can't believe y'all let yourself just get this back broken and not have knowledge of self. It's a hurtful feeling. So what you need to know in your heart, and you can go and research these things and get more research. Just don't follow this little video. This was a tiny little video, but go and research some of these kingdoms for yourself, and see what they were doing. Study the kings and stuff, and study some of they good and they bad, because a lot of these kings did some fucked up shit. And I told you the reason why we got in a situation, because of the overthrow of the Queen Mother. All of these empires, except with those Muslim empires, because that's after the Queen Mothership had fell, actually. So with the exception of like the Sokoto Caliphate and all that stuff, that's when patriarchy went in. But before that, all those empires were diarchies, including the one that with Mansa Musa. Those were diarchies, meaning that they had queen mothers. And of course, no culture that was certainly diarchy. The queen mothers, and they practiced animism. So there was no Muslim or Islam or Christianity or Hebrew at this time. They practiced animism, and of course they were polytheistic. So understand your true nature is to know civilization. We talking about building kingdoms, empires, castles, pyramids, all types of stuff. That Kush, that Kush kingdom that I told you about, they built 250 pyramids. I showed they all types of castles and fortresses that you saw today. So these are the things that you know how to do. Even today in 2020, I don't care. You know how to do it. It's in your DNA. You may need to take a couple classes to read a book or two on architecture and engineering or something, but you're good after that. Because if you didn't go to college, you knew how to do that. If our ancestors knew how to do some shit like that without even going to college and just knew how to build some shit, you think you don't know how to do that today? You're out of your mind. Because these people didn't even have the resources that we have today. They didn't go to a construction apprenticeship school. I mean, they made it, maybe a little bit. So you know what to do. You know everything is in your mind. So I made this Black Man series so that the young black boys can rise in their consciousness, so they can stop giving excuses, so they can reinstate the Queen Mothership and stop getting in the way of their own ascension and consciousness. A lot of the situation that you find yourself in is literally of your own doing. I know y'all like to pass the buck off to other people. You teach people how to treat you. It's as simple as that. And if someone is not acting right, you get the fuck from around them. It's as simple as that. So now that you know the first part of your encoding, which is civilization, stay tuned for the next video, which is part 4. What did the black woman encode in the black man? And that one is going to be titled Architecture. So the next one, we're just going to go through all of Africa's architecture. We're going to just know all of the structures, all of these amazing things that were built from the last 30,000 years, from all over West Africa, East Africa, South Africa, North Africa. We're going to learn it all. So stay tuned for that one. That one's going to be a pretty cool one as well. I know this one was a lot more historic. I wasn't, all animated and stuff. But it was a learning period. This was a learning session for all of us. And it was very important for you to know all of the civilizations that existed. And I'm sure there are more. And if I need to do a part 2 on civilizations, I will. But, I try to make this video somewhat bearable as far as length. Okay? So let everything that you learned marinate in that brain and come back for part 4, which is going to be architecture. And black women, you're listening to this, understand that this is within your DNA as well, because you give this to your children. So you know how to do these things as well, but you as the mother of the race, as the queen mother and the teacher of the children, this is a given because you give birth to them. So as you're watching and learning this stuff, this is a remembrance for you as well. So now that you know that your sons can do civilization and build, now you got to crack the whip and start cracking their head and making sure that they build it. Because if they know how to do it, and I done proved to you that they know how to do it, build a civilization, you as the mother, the queen mother, got to make sure that they do your bidding and build you that civilization. So let's continue to learn knowledge of self, and let's continue to rise in our consciousness. I'm going to talk to y'all later. Bye.